My name is Marcus, and I'm 31. My job is to resurrect the dead, technologically speaking. I bring phones, laptops, and vintage gaming consoles back to life for people who've given up on them. I operate out of a small space just south of Portland, in a sleepy suburb, where the loudest sound is usually a lawn mower. The shop itself is nothing special, tucked into a modest strip mall between a family-run taqueria and a laundromat that always smells faintly of burnt fabric. I've been anchored here for 5 years, ever since my divorce. In the aftermath of that, I made a conscious decision to stop pursuing anything that wasn't straightforward and predictable, which put relationships at the top of the list. I find comfort in my routine, in the certainty of what each day holds. But life, I've learned, has a particular fondness for disrupting that kind of settled mindset. It all began on a Thursday morning, just after 10. I was hunched over my workbench, meticulously soldering a loose connection on a circuit board, the scent of hot metal filling my small workspace. The little bell over the shop door chimed, and I looked up, expecting a customer with a cracked screen. Instead, it was Chloe, my best friend. She'd been my best friend since we were both awkward teenagers trying to survive high school chemistry. She stood there in her usual uniform, a worn-out band t-shirt, jeans with a smear of paint on the knee from her latest art project, and her blonde hair pulled back in a haphazard ponytail. She was holding 2 coffees, one for me, one for her, just like she did at least twice a week. It was part of our rhythm, the unspoken contract of our friendship. "Morning," I said, pulling off my magnifying goggles. "You're a lifesaver. I was about to resort to the instant stuff in the back." She set my cup on the counter, a black Americano, just how I like it. Couldn't let that happen. It's a humanitarian issue. She didn't smile, her usual easy smile, though. There was a hesitancy in her movements, a subtle tension around her eyes that I recognized as her tell for when something was weighing on her. She leaned against the counter, wrapping both hands around her own latte as if drawing warmth from it. We were quiet for a moment, the only sound the low hum of a computer fan on my bench. This was normal for us. We didn't need to fill every silence. But this silence felt different. It felt heavier, occupied. Finally, she looked up from her cup, her gaze meeting mine, and she said it, the sentence that would recalibrate our entire universe. "I had a dream about us last night." I paused, a half-eaten muffin in my hand. I tried for a casual tone, a joke to diffuse whatever this was. "Oh yeah? Did I finally fix your perpetually dying laptop in it?" She shook her head slowly, her expression unreadable. No, it wasn't like that. A knot of something I couldn't name tightened in my stomach. I put the muffin down. What kind of dream? That was the beginning of the shift. From that moment, every easy, comfortable piece of our friendship felt like it was being re-examined under a microscope. I'd known Chloe for 15 years. I knew she hummed when she was concentrating, that she hated the sound of people chewing, and that she secretly loved terrible reality television. We'd seen each other through bad haircuts, terrible first dates, family tragedies, my marriage, and my divorce. She was the constant, the one person whose presence in my life I never questioned. We existed in a carefully constructed platonic space, a sanctuary I'd come to rely on more than I ever admitted. We didn't text constantly or make grand plans. Our friendship was a series of comfortable, overlapping routines. Coffee drop-ins, late-night calls when one of us couldn't sleep, shared takeout on rainy Sundays. It was a language we'd built together over a decade and a half, and I was suddenly afraid I no longer knew how to speak it. After she told me about the dream, or rather, told me that she'd had a dream because she never actually described it, an invisible film settled between us. The next few days were a study in awkward navigation. We'd fall into our old banter, and then one of us would remember, and a beat of silence would fall. It was like tripping over a rug that had never been there before. A few days later, we ended up at our usual spot for lunch, a little sandwich shop downtown. She was telling me about a new commission she'd gotten, a mural for a local library, and for a moment it felt normal. Then she paused mid-sentence, looking down at her sandwich. "Is this weird now?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Me telling you that?" I took a slow sip of my soda, buying myself time. "I don't know. It was unexpected." "I know," she sighed. "I almost didn't say anything. It just sort of came out. I'm sorry if it made things uncomfortable." "It's not uncomfortable." I lied, or maybe I didn't. It was something more complicated than discomfort. It's just different. I thought about the easy way I used to be able to sling an arm around her shoulder or nudge her with my elbow. Now I found myself mapping the space between us, hyper-aware of every gesture. One afternoon, I saw her through my shop window. She was sitting on the curb outside, sketching in her notepad. The sun was making a rare Oregon appearance, catching the stray strands of her hair. She had a smudge of charcoal on her cheek, a pencil tucked behind her ear, and a look of such intense focus that she seemed to be in her own world. She looked like a painting herself, a portrait of quiet creativity. I almost walked out to say hi, to make a joke, but I stopped myself. A thought surfaced, unbidden and unwelcome. She was beautiful. It wasn't a new realization. Objectively, I'd always known she was, but this was the first time the thought carried weight, the first time it felt less like an observation and more like a confession. And that scared the hell out of me. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the line we'd never crossed. We'd orbited each other's romantic lives for years, offering advice, a shoulder to cry on, and celebratory drinks. We were the safe harbor. The idea of jeopardizing that for something as fragile and uncertain as a dream felt like madness. I saw her again the next morning. She was leaving the taqueria next door with a breakfast burrito, her earbuds in, lost in a podcast. I was carrying a heavy, obsolete server out to my car for recycling. I walked past her, managing a small nod and a mumbled, "Morning." She pulled one earbud out and glanced up. "Hey," she said, her voice softer than usual. "You want half of this? I always overestimate my appetite." I stopped. That's a tempting offer, probably the best one I'll get all day. She tore the foil, broke off a chunk, and handed it to me. "Don't say I never feed you." We stood there on the sidewalk, eating in a silence that felt both familiar and brand new. The sounds of morning traffic filled the space between our words. Finally, I had to ask, "You doing okay?" She didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on the street. "Yeah, it's just, today's the anniversary." I waited. I knew which one she meant. "A year ago today, I was supposed to be getting married," she said, her voice flat. I watched her face, the subtle tightening of her jaw. Her ex-fiancé had left her a month before the wedding. No big fight, no dramatic betrayal. He'd just woken up one day and decided he wasn't in love anymore. The fallout had been brutal, and I'd been the one helping her pack up his things, fielding calls from concerned relatives and making sure she ate. There was a long pause. "Sorry," she added, shaking her head as if to clear it. "That's way too heavy for a burrito conversation." I shook my head. "No, it's not." I didn't tell her then, but I understood that specific kind of phantom limb pain, the ache of a future that gets amputated without warning. Mine had been a slow, painful decay, but the end result was the same. Waking up one day next to a stranger who used to be your whole world. We didn't talk much more that morning. I finished my half of the burrito and said, "Well, if you ever need anything fixed that isn't a motherboard, I also do leaky faucets, wobbly chair legs, and light to moderate emotional support." She finally smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. The next few days settled into a new kind of quiet rhythm. We didn't text about the dream, we didn't talk about it, but every time our paths crossed, there was a shared acknowledgement, a silent understanding that something fundamental had been altered. It was just enough to keep the tension alive. One evening, I was closing up late, reorganizing a drawer full of tangled cables that looked like a nest of robotic snakes. I heard a soft knock on the glass of the shop door. Chloe was standing in the doorway, holding a Tupperware container. "I made way too much soup," she said, offering the container as evidence. I looked at the container, then back at her silhouette against the darkening parking lot. That sounds suspiciously like a thinly veiled excuse to hang out. Very thin. I cleared off a stool in the back. We ate in a comfortable quiet at first, surrounded by the ghosts of dead electronics. I asked if she was making any progress on the library mural. She told me she was, that she'd spent the whole day on a ladder, and her arms felt like noodles. "Born and raised here?" she asked, changing the subject. 15 minutes from this very spot," I said. "My grand rebellion was moving one town over." We both chuckled, and then she asked it. "What's your story, Marcus? I mean, I know the headlines, but not the details." I looked down at my soup. "Married young. Divorced 2 years ago. No huge drama, we just stopped being on the same team. We grew in different directions until we were too far apart to hear each other." She nodded, her expression full of an understanding that needed no words. I continued, more to myself than to her. "I used to believe that if something was broken, you just had to try harder to fix it. But I've learned that sometimes things break for a reason. Sometimes they're not meant to be put back together." There was a beat of silence, and then she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't think I'm really looking for anything right now." It hung in the air between us, a statement that was also a question. "Me neither," I said. Then I added, because it felt important to be honest, "But I'm not completely closed off to the idea of it, either." "Same," she said, her voice even quieter. She left shortly after that. I stood at the door and watched her walk across the asphalt, her jacket pulled tight against the evening chill, the sound of her footsteps fading into the night. But the echo of her words stuck in my head long after she was gone. That weekend, I found myself glancing out the front window of the shop every time I heard a car door slam in the parking lot. I hated it. I wasn't that guy, the one who waits around, hoping for a glimpse of someone. But something about Chloe, something about this new, fragile space we were in, felt magnetic in a way I couldn't articulate. I finally saw her again on Sunday afternoon. She was outside her apartment building, which was just a few blocks from mine, wrestling with a large, flat-packed bookcase. I pulled over. "Need a hand with that?" I asked, getting out of my car. "I've got it," she said, her voice strained as she tried to get a better grip. "I know you do," I said, walking over. "Just thought an extra set of arms might speed things up." After a moment, she relented. We carried it up the 3 flights of stairs to her place. As we set it down in her living room, she asked, "Do you just drive around looking for friends in distress?" "Only the ones who share their breakfast burritos and confess their weird dreams before 9 a.m. She laughed, a bright, clear sound that seemed to chase some of the shadows out of the room. And I swear, for a split second, the way she looked at me wasn't like a friend looks at a friend. It was something else, something deeper and steadier. We finished assembling the bookcase and stood there, surrounded by her art, the scent of turpentine and coffee hanging in the air. It was a strange kind of quiet, not awkward, but full, like the air was charged with unspoken words. She turned to me, her expression serious. Do you ever feel like you're deliberately keeping your distance from something good just because you're terrified of what it might mean if you got closer? I looked right at her, into her clear blue eyes, and the answer was so loud in my own head it was a wonder she couldn't hear it. She didn't say anything else, just gave a small, knowing nod, smiled a little, and went to the kitchen to get us some water. I stood there for another 30 seconds, hands shoved in my pockets, thinking, maybe some people don't crash into your life like a comet. Maybe some are more like a constellation you've been looking at your whole life, and you only just realized what you were seeing. It was a Thursday in late October, on the cusp of the season's change, that kind of day where the air holds both the memory of warmth and the promise of cold. Chloe and I had tacitly agreed, without ever speaking the words, that we were better at a slight distance. We didn't text about personal things. We didn't make specific plans to see each other outside of our usual happenstance encounters. We just continued to exist in the same orbit, more aware of each other's gravity than ever before. That week, our mutual friend Sarah, the perpetually cheerful barista from the coffee shop we both frequented, had guilt-tripped us into volunteering for a local charity drive. It involved sorting mountains of donated goods in a cavernous warehouse. We both agreed, because arguing with Sarah's relentless optimism was far more exhausting than just showing up. So there we were, under the buzz of fluorescent lights, folding other people's discarded histories into neat piles. Chloe was working across a long folding table from me. Her hair was pulled back, her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, and she wore a look of intense concentration. It seemed like being busy, having a task to focus on, was her natural state, a way to keep her own thoughts at bay. We didn't speak much initially, sticking to safe logistical topics, how many boxes were left, whether we thought we'd ever earn a pizza break, and marveling at the sheer volume of faded band t-shirts from the early 2000s. At one point, someone handed her a box of old formal wear, and she pulled out a truly hideous bridesmaid dress, the color of a dying avocado. She held it up with a smirk. Guess this happily ever after didn't last. I laughed. Somebody's bad decisions just became a tax write-off. We kept folding. Someone put on a generic classic rock station, the volume low enough to be unobtrusive. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd of volunteers began to thin out. People left to pick up kids, make phone calls, or simply escape the monotony. Before I knew it, it was just the two of us at our table, working through a pile of winter coats, standing side by side in a comfortable, practiced silence. She leaned against the table's edge, arching her back with a soft groan. I am officially sick of touching strangers' clothes, she announced. That was quick, I replied without looking up. You held out longer than I did. She looked over at me, a slow, tired smile spreading across her face. And I don't know why. Maybe it was the hum of the lights, the quiet of the nearly empty warehouse, or the way a stray piece of hair had fallen across her cheek. But I said it. I made a joke, the kind of thing I always said to keep things light, to build a wall of humor around anything too real. It's weird thinking about us that way, right? From your dream? Imagine us as a couple. It'd probably be a total disaster. I said it with a laugh, hoping the sound would cover the terrifying kernel of sincerity behind it. But she didn't laugh. She didn't look away. She just stood there, her gaze locked on mine. Her head tilted slightly, and she gave me the smallest smile I had ever seen on her face, a look that was equal parts sad and warm. And then she said, her voice so quiet it was almost swallowed by the cavernous room, I do, a lot. Then she turned, picked up a box of sorted jackets, and walked toward the back of the warehouse. There was no hesitation, no dramatic flair, no glance back over her shoulder. Just a woman stating a simple, profound truth, and walking away before I could find the words to dismantle it. I stood there like a statue, my hand still holding a half-folded Parker, my arms frozen in mid-air as my brain scrambled to catch up to what my ears had just processed. I do. A lot. I kept replaying the 3 words, the tone, the timing, the way she hadn't waited for my reaction. She wasn't asking for anything. She was just handing me a piece of her truth, a truth she'd clearly been holding on to for a long time. We didn't speak again for the rest of the afternoon. We found tasks in separate corners of the warehouse, offering polite, distant smiles if our eyes happened to meet. We avoided each other just enough for it to feel intentional. When the event finally wrapped up, she grabbed her keys, gave Sarah a quick hug, and then just raised a hand to me from across the parking lot. No words, just that look again, the one that suggested she wanted to say more but was terrified she had already said far too much. I drove home in absolute silence, the radio off, my world filled only by the sweep of my headlights on the road and the echo of her voice in my head. I do. A lot. That night, sleep was a foreign concept. I lay in bed, staring at the textured patterns on my ceiling, meticulously reviewing every conversation, every shared joke, every quiet moment we'd had over the past 15 years. I was searching for clues I had missed, signs that her feelings ran deeper than the comfortable friendship I had taken for granted. And in doing so, I had to confront a terrifying question. Had mine? Had I kept her so firmly in the best friend category in my own mind because it was safer? Because after the wreckage of my marriage, the idea of risking my most important friendship on the slim chance of finding love again was unthinkable. I wasn't just folding coats next to a girl who'd had a weird dream. I was standing next to my best friend, who had just confessed she saw a future for us, and I was quietly, terrifyingly realizing I saw it too. For the first time in years, the thought of a relationship didn't fill me with dread. It just made me want to see her again, immediately. But what do you say? What are the words for the moment after everything has changed? And worse, what if I wanted it to change? The next morning, I arrived at my shop a full 20 minutes early, not even realizing it until I had unlocked the door, and the clock on the wall glared at me. My mind was a mess. I kept replaying what she'd said. I do, a lot, and how she'd said it, like a secret she'd accidentally let slip. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself it was just a fleeting moment. People say things when they're tired, when they're standing in a poorly lit warehouse surrounded by other people's memories. That's all it was. It had to be. Still, my eyes kept drifting to the front window. Her apartment was nearby, but she didn't have a set schedule, so I didn't expect to see her, but I looked anyway. She didn't show up until after 11. I saw her car pull into the lot, and I immediately spun around and pretended to be busy with a stack of invoices, like a teenager caught staring. Pathetic. I was 31 years old. The bell on my door jingled at around 11:15. I looked up from my desk. It wasn't a customer. It was Chloe. She was holding a small white pastry box, clutching it like a shield. She walked in with a confidence that belied the nervousness in her eyes, as if she'd been in my shop 100 times, even though she rarely came past the front counter. "Peace offering," she said, placing the box on the counter between us. "Or an apology, whichever you think fits better." I managed a small smile. "For what?" "For yesterday," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "For saying something weird. I wasn't planning on, saying that out loud." I gestured toward the back of the shop. "You want to sit down?" She nodded and followed me to the tall stool I kept by my workbench, the one I used for delicate, close-up repairs. She perched on it, her hands resting on the box, her gaze fixed on a dismantled laptop. "I'm not really sure what that moment was," she began, her voice low. Maybe I was just exhausted, or maybe I actually meant it. Either way, I'm sure it caught you off guard. I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms over my chest in a defensive posture I didn't intend. Yeah, I admitted. It did. But not in a bad way. That made her look at me, finally. It made me think, I added. I paused, trying to find the right words that wouldn't reveal that I'd been obsessing over it all night. About us, I said. About how easy it's always been. I don't know your middle name, and I couldn't tell you your favorite color, but I know the exact sound of your laugh when you think something is genuinely funny. I know you tap your pen 3 times on the table before you start to draw, and I know you never ever finish the last bite of your dessert. A soft smile touched her lips. That's very observant of you. A quiet settled between us, not the awkward silence of the past few days, but something heavier, more substantial. She opened the box. Inside was a single, perfect slice of chocolate cake. This is the official peace offering, she said. Because I figure if we're going to start saying things we don't mean to say, or maybe that we do mean to say, we should at least do it with sugar. I let out a laugh, more from relief than anything else. She broke off a piece with the plastic fork she'd brought and held it out to me. I took it. Do you ever do that? She asked suddenly. Say something completely real, and then immediately wish you could suck the words right back out of the air? All the time, I said, chewing the rich, dark chocolate. But sometimes I think those are the only things that are really worth saying. She nodded, like she already knew the answer, but needed to hear someone else say it. We sat there for another 20 minutes, sharing the slice of cake and not saying much at all. Just being in the same room, without the pretense, felt like enough. Before she left, she paused at the door and turned back to me. I don't want things to be weird between us, Marcus. Me neither, I said honestly. And I don't think they are. I think they're just shifting. I could tell she liked that word. She stepped out into the sunlight, then turned back one last time. You fix things, right? I raised an eyebrow. That's the general idea. She held up a small, beat-up digital camera, an old point-and-shoot from a decade ago. My dad gave this to me for my 16th birthday. It has years of photos on the memory card, but I dropped it last night and it won't turn on. Do you think you can fix it? I took it from her. The casing was cracked near the lens, and a button was missing. It was obsolete, but I could see the sentimental value it held. I can try, I told her. No promises. Good, she replied, a faint smile on her lips. Because I'm not sure I'm ready for promises anyway. She left after that, walking across the parking lot and leaving me with her broken camera and a dozen more questions than I'd had when I woke up. That night, long after I'd locked up the shop, I sat at my workbench, carefully disassembling her camera piece by piece. I wasn't sure why I was so determined to fix it, but I knew it wasn't really about the camera. It was about the act of restoration. It was about taking something broken, something filled with history, and patiently, meticulously putting it back together. It was about doing something slow, something intentional, something that couldn't be rushed. As I located the loose connection on the power supply, I thought, maybe this is how we're supposed to happen, not in a flash of lightning, but one careful connection at a time. A week went by. I could have fixed the camera in an afternoon, but I didn't. I took my time, ordering a tiny replacement button online, cleaning every contact, resoldering the connection with surgical precision. The process was meditative. It gave me an excuse to think about her, to think about us, without the pressure of an immediate conversation. Chloe didn't text or stop by, but she didn't vanish either. I saw her nearly every day through my window, sketching on the curb, talking on her phone, laughing with Sarah when she dropped off coffee. The only thing that had changed was the way our eyes met across the parking lot. It wasn't the look of strangers, or even of friends anymore. It was the look of two people who had said something true and couldn't take it back. On Friday, just as I was getting ready to close, I put the camera in a small, padded box and walked over to her apartment. I knocked on the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. She opened it, and her face instantly softened, as if she'd been waiting for this exact moment without even realizing it. "Hey," I said. "Hey." I handed her the box. She opened it, lifted out the camera, and just stared at it, her expression full of a quiet awe. "You fixed it?" "Yeah," I said. "It turns on, the lens extends, the memory card is fine, it's alive." She turned it over and over in her hands, her touch so gentle she seemed afraid she might break it again. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. There was a long pause, the kind that holds the weight of an entire history. Then she looked up at me, her gaze steady and clear. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Do we just go, back to folding coats and pretending we don't think about each other?" I didn't answer right away. I had been asking myself that same question all week. "No," I said finally, the word feeling more certain than anything I'd said in years. "I don't want to go back to pretending." Her eyes didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still. "I don't either," she whispered. It felt like a heavy cloak was being lifted from the room. She stepped out from the doorway and stood in front of me on the landing. "You know I'm not looking for some big, dramatic romance," she said. "I'm not 22 anymore. I don't need fireworks. I just need real. I need quiet, and I need steady." I nodded slowly. "I'm not trying to rush into anything," I said. I want to be where you are, whatever that looks like." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made me feel like I'd just spoken a language she'd been waiting her whole life to hear. She glanced down at the camera in her hands, then back up at me. "Still imagining us together?" she asked, her tone teasing but her eyes serious. I smiled back. "No," I said. "Now I'm just living it." She didn't say anything. She just closed the small distance between us and wrapped her arms around my neck, holding on like she was anchoring herself. And for the first time, I let myself hold her back, fully and completely, without a joke or a buffer or the fear that the ground was about to crumble beneath my feet. For the first time in a very long time, nothing felt temporary. Nothing felt like it needed to be guarded by sarcasm or small talk. It just was. We spent that evening walking through our neighborhood, with no destination, just talking. We were really talking for the first time, without any filters, about our pasts, our fears, and the quiet, tentative hopes we held for the future. Then, without any ceremony or overthinking, she turned to me and said, "Do you want to come over tomorrow? Just to hang out?" No pressure, no expectations. I said yes. The next day bled into the next week, which then turned into the next month. There was nothing explosive about it. It was a collection of quiet moments, making breakfast together, watching movies on her couch, taking long walks. She'd bring me a single, perfect flower from her garden on her way home, and I'd fix the wobbly leg on her favorite painting stool without her having to ask. We never put a label on it, and we never rushed it, but we both knew exactly what it was. 3 months later, she kissed me in the middle of my chaotic shop while I was trying to fix a vintage record player. She pulled back and said, "Just so you know, I'm not going anywhere." And I looked at her, my best friend, the woman who had seen every broken part of me and wasn't afraid, and I said, "Good." I had stopped imagining us a long time ago. So that's how it ended. Or maybe, how it truly began. No grand gestures, no dramatic confessions, no tragic twists. Just two people who finally stopped hiding behind the safety of their old stories long enough to start writing a new one together. No more jokes, no more waiting. Just her and me, exactly where we were always supposed to be.